In 2022, every pundit in world football was asking the same question about Rafinha. Is he the next Neymar? The media ran it. The fans debated it. Barcelona paid 58 million euros hoping the answer was yes. But Ronaldinho said no, publicly, without hesitation. You can't compare him to Neymar. They have different styles of play. But Rafinha has everything to succeed at Barcelona. This is how Ronaldinho warned us 4 years ago. Before the Camp Nou lights, before the comparisons, before any of it. There was a freezing Tuesday night in Leeds, England, where a Brazilian winger was quietly doing something extraordinary that most of the football world was too busy to notice. Rafinha arrived at Leeds United in October 2020 for £17 million. Signed from French club Rennes, Leeds had just clawed their way back to the Premier League after 16 years in exile. And Marcelo Bielsa, a man who runs his players like he's personally offended by the concept of rest, needed someone who could handle the intensity of English football from day one. Rafinha didn't just handle it. He made it look like he'd been waiting his entire life for someone to finally ask him to run this hard. From the very first months, this was clearly not a player who needed an adaptation period. He was direct, fearless, and technically gifted in a way that looked almost rude in the context of the Premier League's relentless physicality. He dribbled past defenders like they owed him money. He scored goals that belonged in a highlight reel from a completely different competition. And he did it consistently, week after week, in a Leeds team that was always fighting, always sprinting, always one bad result away from full institutional crisis. His first full season cemented his reputation. His second season elevated him to a completely different atmosphere. In 2021 to 22, with Leeds desperately battling relegation like a man trying to climb out of quicksand, Rafinha single-handedly kept them breathing. He finished as the club's top goalscorer with 11 goals, including scoring a crucial penalty in the 2-1 final day win against Brentford to ensure Leeds stayed in the top flight.
Hey everyone, this video is sponsored by OK Jersey, rated an impressive 4.5 stars on Trustpilot. Fans love them for high-quality jerseys, great prices, only £15, and super fast delivery. They offer a huge selection of new season, retro, and even upcoming World Cup kits. Use code MAUS at checkout to get 8% off your order. Don't wait, go check them out.
What followed was one of the most dramatic transfer sagas of the 2022 summer window. And in a window that included half of Europe losing its collective mind, that's saying something. Chelsea wanted him. Arsenal wanted him. Both clubs made serious, concrete, we will give you actual money right now offers. Both clubs believed they were close to getting him. Chelsea, in particular, were confident. They had the financial muscle, they had the project, they had the pitch. But Rafinha had already made up his mind. There was only one club he wanted, and that club was FC Barcelona. The problem? Barcelona were in financial chaos, and not the cute, manageable kind. The club was drowning in debt measured in billions, not millions. They were operating under strict financial fair play restrictions so severe they could barely register the players they already had on their books. Signing a new winger for serious money felt less like a transfer and more like a magic trick. Yet somehow, Barcelona found a way. They activated their now infamous financial levers, restructured their finances with the urgency of a man defusing a bomb, and secured Rafinha for around 58 million euros in July 2022. He'd chosen Barcelona over clubs that could have paid him more, offered him more security, and guaranteed him more playing time. He chose the chaos, he chose the pressure, he chose the shadow. And it was at that exact moment that the shadow fell over him. Because the last Brazilian winger Barcelona paid serious money for was Neymar. And before Neymar, it was Ronaldinho. The bar wasn't just high, it was in orbit. And Rafinha hadn't even laced up his boots yet. His first season at Barcelona was honest. That's the kindest word for it, and also the most accurate. Not a disaster. not the explosion everyone had hoped for either. Somewhere in between, in that uncomfortable territory where you can see the talent but you can't quite see the finished product, he showed flashes of the player Leeds fans knew. Moments of individual brilliance that made you sit up. Crucial goals in important matches that reminded you why Barcelona had moved heaven and earth and several financial instruments to sign him. An obvious, almost painful desire to prove himself at the highest level. But consistency was elusive. The team around him was still being rebuilt, brick by brick, in the middle of what felt like a permanent construction site. The tactical structure under Xavi was evolving, and the weight of expectation at a club like Barcelona has ended careers that looked far more promising than Rafinha's did in those early months. There were nights where the doubters grew louder. Nights where the Neymar comparisons felt less like compliments and more like a measuring stick he was always going to fall short of. Some questioned whether the fee had been too high, whether he was a Premier League player, a very good one, but a Premier League player nonetheless, who couldn't quite translate his game to the technical demands of La Liga. The commentary sections filled up with the same lazy analysis. He's no Neymar, as if anyone had asked him to be. As if the entire point of signing Rafinha was to produce a photocopy of someone who left the club half a decade earlier. But Rafinha kept working, he kept showing up, he kept running until his legs screamed and then he ran some more. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. This is the chapter where Ronaldinho starts looking like a time traveller. By his second and third seasons at Barcelona, the player who had lit up Elland Road started to re-emerge. But not as a copy, not as a return, as something different, sharper, more refined. Operating at a level that made his Leeds years look like a rough draft for the masterpiece he was about to paint. The inconsistency faded like a bad dream. The goals came more regularly. The assists piled up. His understanding of the tactical system deepened from following instructions to writing the instructions himself. He stopped being a passenger in Barcelona's attacking structure and became its engine, its identity, its central nervous system. He stopped trying to be anybody else. And that was the key. That was the entire key. He stopped carrying the comparisons like luggage and started playing like a man who had finally accepted that the only player he needed to be better than was yesterday's version of himself. He became the player Ronaldinho had quietly predicted he would be 4 years earlier. Not the next Neymar, not the next Ronaldinho, something entirely his own. A winger with the heart of a number 9, the vision of a playmaker, and the relentless hunger of someone who remembers exactly what it felt like to fight relegation in the cold of Yorkshire. The numbers told one story. The eye test told an even better one. This was a man who had been told he wasn't good enough, told he was too expensive, told he was living in someone else's shadow, and responded by setting the shadow on fire. Remember what Ronaldinho said? You can't compare him to Neymar. They have different styles of play. 4 years later, that quote didn't just look accurate. It looked like the most obvious statement in the history of football. The kind of thing that makes you wonder why anyone ever disagreed in the first place. By the 2024-25 season, the conversation had changed so completely that if you went back and read the old takes, you'd assume they were about a different player entirely. Rafinha was no longer being asked if he could live up to Barcelona's Brazilian legacy. He was the one other players were being compared to. He was producing performances that placed him among the very best players in world football, combining goals, assists, and moments of individual magic in a way that made even the most stubborn Barcelona purists admit they had been completely, embarrassingly wrong about him. The shadow of Ronaldinho and Neymar that had followed him through the gates of Camp Nou back in 2022 had finally, fully disappeared. Not because those legends had been forgotten, not because their achievements had been diminished, but because Rafinha had built something so undeniably his own that no comparison was needed anymore. Comparing him to Neymar at this point would have been like comparing a thunderstorm to an earthquake, both powerful, both capable of rearranging the landscape, but fundamentally different forces of nature. From a £17 million signing at a club fighting for survival in the English winter, to one of the most feared wingers on the planet, playing under the lights of Camp Nou, like he was born to be there. That is the real story of Rafinha at FC Barcelona. And the man who called it? The man who saw it coming before anyone else. He'd been smiling about it for 4 years. Here is what makes the Ronaldinho quote so remarkable in hindsight. He didn't say Rafinha was better than Neymar. He didn't say Rafinha was worse. He said the comparison itself was wrong. The framework people were using to evaluate this player was broken from the start. That the football world was so obsessed with finding the next version of someone that they were completely blind to the original standing right in front of them. Ronaldinho understood something the rest of us took 4 years to figure out. That Rafinha's story was never about living up to those who came before him. It was about whether he could be brave enough to simply be himself at a club that demands greatness, in a shirt that carries the weight of legends, under a spotlight that has melted players with twice his pedigree. He was brave enough, and now, the shadow that once loomed over him, it's his. He made his own, and it stretches all the way from Elland Road to Camp Nou. Ronaldinho warned us 4 years ago. We just weren't listening. If this story reminded you why football is the greatest drama on earth, subscribe. I cover the stories behind the stories every week. And if you want to see how another player defied impossible expectations at a club that eats careers for breakfast, that video is on screen right now. If you want to follow the story of how a team of academy kids conquered the entire football world, check out our video here.